The courthouse cafeteria worker's memory. Rosa Martinez had served coffee and sandwiches in the courthouse cafeteria for 35 years. She never forgot a face, especially not Judge Harold Fitzgerald's, which is why her blood ran cold when he walked in that Tuesday morning. Judge Fitzgerald had died in a car accident 20 years ago. She'd served food at his funeral. Yet here he stood, ordering his usual black coffee and rye toast, wearing a different name tag, Federal Judge William Crawford. The courthouse cafeteria wasn't much to look at. Fluorescent lights hummed over worn linoleum floors. Plastic chairs surrounded small tables where lawyers grabbed quick lunches between cases. The coffee was mediocre, the sandwiches basic, but the location was convenient, and Rosa's service was always warm and reliable. She'd been there since 1988, watching the legal system's daily dramas unfold over tuna melts and coffee refills. Rosa prided herself on her memory. After 35 years, she knew every regular's order. Judge Patterson, turkey on wheat, no mayo. District Attorney Sullivan, black coffee and a blueberry muffin. Public Defender Chen, vegetarian wrap and green tea. She remembered birthdays, asked about children, celebrated victories, and offered quiet sympathy after defeats. The cafeteria might have been simple, but Rosa made it a sanctuary in the often harsh world of criminal justice. Judge Harold Fitzgerald had been one of her favorites during his decade on the bench. A fair man who treated everyone with respect. From fellow judges to the teenagers appearing before him, he always had a kind word for Rosa, asked about her family. And every Christmas, without fail, he'd slip a card with a $20 bill into her hand, with a wink and a Merry Christmas, Rosa. She remembered July 15, 2003, with painful clarity. The news had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Judge Fitzgerald's car had gone off Mountain Road during a thunderstorm, crashed into a ravine, and burst into flames. The body was badly burned but identified through dental records. The entire legal community mourned. Rosa had catered the memorial service, tears streaming as she served finger sandwiches to grieving colleagues. Which is why seeing him walk into her cafeteria 20 years later felt like seeing a ghost. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, approaching the counter. "Black coffee and rye toast. Please, no butter." The voice was the same, the unusual green eyes that seemed to see right through people, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd once told her about, the slightly crooked nose from his college boxing days, even the way he drummed his fingers on the counter while waiting thumb to pinky in sequence, a nervous habit she'd noticed hundreds of times. But his name tag read Judge William Crawford, Federal District Court. Rosa's hands trembled as she poured the coffee. "Have we met before, Judge?" He looked at her with those distinctive green eyes, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, fear. Then it was gone, replaced by polite confusion. "I don't believe so. I was just appointed to this district last month, transferred from Nevada." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Though I must say, you do look familiar. Perhaps we've crossed paths at a legal conference." Rosa forced herself to stay calm. "Perhaps I've been here a long time." She gave him his order. Noticed he paid with cash. Judge Fitzgerald had always paid with cash too. Exact change. Never wanted receipts. He took his usual table in the corner, the same table Judge Fitzgerald had preferred for its view of both entrances. "Before we continue this mysterious encounter, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe the dead sometimes walk among us with new names, hit that subscribe button." Justice System USA brings you stories that challenge everything you think you know about justice and identity. Rosa watched him eat, every gesture achingly familiar. The way he tore his toast into small pieces, how he held his coffee cup with both hands, the particular way he wiped his mouth with a napkin, 3 precise dabs at the left corner. She had to be sure. When he left, she followed him at a distance through the courthouse halls. He walked with the same slight favor to his right leg, an old injury from his time in the Army, Judge Fitzgerald had once explained. He stopped at the same water fountain on the 3rd floor. He even stood in the same spot in the elevator. Back left corner. But according to every record, every document, every witness, Judge Harold Fitzgerald had been dead for 20 years. That evening, Rosa went home and dug through her closets until she found it, a box of photos from courthouse events over the years. There, at the 2001 Christmas party, stood Judge Fitzgerald. She held the photo next to the one she'd secretly taken with her phone that morning, allowing for 20 years of aging. They were the same man. Rosa spent the next week researching Judge Harold Fitzgerald, born 1952 in Boston. Harvard Law, appointed to the bench in 1993, died 2003. Judge William Crawford, born 1954 in Phoenix. Stanford Law, practiced in Nevada for 20 years before his recent federal appointment. Different histories, different backgrounds, but somehow the same face, same voice, same mannerisms. She learned that Judge Crawford had no family, no close friends from before 2003. His career history before that date was surprisingly thin. paper trails that led nowhere, references to cases that seemed oddly generic. It was as if William Crawford had sprung into existence fully formed as a middle-aged lawyer right around the time Harold Fitzgerald died. The rational explanation was that she was mistaken. People could look alike. 20 years was a long time. Memories could play tricks. But Rosa knew better. She'd served thousands of people over the decades, and she'd never forgotten a face. Especially not one she'd seen nearly every day for 10 years. She tried to let it go. What did it matter if somehow Judge Fitzgerald had faked his death and assumed a new identity? He wasn't hurting anyone. By all accounts, Judge Crawford was a fair and competent jurist. Maybe he'd had reasons. Maybe he'd been in danger. Maybe it was witness protection or some other legitimate explanation. But the questions gnawed at her. Why fake your death? Why become a judge again, risking exposure? And most troubling, who had actually died in that car crash 20 years ago? Rosa decided to dig deeper. She spent her evenings at the library, researching the original accident. The newspaper accounts were strangely sparse for such a prominent figure's death. The investigation had been closed quickly. The body had been cremated immediately after the autopsy. At the request of Fitzgerald's supposed next of kin, a sister. No one had ever heard him mention. Then she found something odd in the court records. 3 days before his death, Judge Fitzgerald had been scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury. The subject was sealed, but Rosa found references to an investigation into judicial corruption, connections between certain judges and organized crime figures. The investigation had quietly ended after Fitzgerald's death. The pieces were starting to form a picture Rosa didn't like. Had Judge Fitzgerald been involved in corruption? Had he faked his death to avoid prosecution? Or had he been about to expose others and needed to disappear for his safety? She needed more information, but where to turn? The local police would think she was crazy. The FBI seemed too dramatic for what might be mistaken identity. She decided to start smaller, with someone who might remember Judge Fitzgerald as well. As she did, Margaret O'Brien had been the court clerk during Fitzgerald's tenure. Now 78, and retired. She lived in a senior community outside town. Rosa visited on a Saturday, bringing homemade cookies as an excuse. "Rosa, how wonderful to see you," Margaret exclaimed. They chatted about old times, former colleagues, the changes at the courthouse. Then Rosa carefully steered the conversation. "I was going through old photos the other day. Found some from Judge Fitzgerald's time. Such a tragedy, him dying so young." Margaret's expression shifted slightly. "Yes, a tragedy. You know, I could have sworn I saw someone who looked just like him the other day. Isn't that strange how grief plays tricks on us?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked directly at Rosa. "Was this person you saw? Was he wearing judicial robes?" Rosa's heart raced. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've seen him too. At a judicial conference in Chicago last year, nearly gave me a heart attack. Same walk, same laugh, same everything. But his name was William Crawford." Where are you watching from? This mystery deepens with every revelation. Share this video to spread awareness about the secrets hiding in our justice system. Subscribe to Justice System USA for the shocking truth about Judge Fitzgerald's death. The two women stared at each other, the weight of shared knowledge hanging between them. "I did some checking after I saw him," Margaret continued quietly. "The night Judge Fitzgerald died, there was a John Doe brought into the morgue. Similar height and build to the judge. Badly burned, no identification. The body was claimed the next day by someone posing as family and cremated immediately. You think? I think Harold Fitzgerald needed to disappear, and someone helped him. Someone with enough power to create a new identity, complete with credentials and history. Someone who could ensure a federal judgeship appointment 20 years later." "But why?" Rosa asked. "Why risk coming back to the bench?" Margaret pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping she'd kept in her purse. "Remember the Calabrese trial? The mob boss who walked on a technicality?" Rosa nodded. It had been a huge scandal. Vincent Calabrese, head of the Eastern crime family, had been about to be convicted when key evidence mysteriously disappeared. The judge had been forced to dismiss the case. "Harold was the judge," Margaret said, "and 3 days before he died, he was subpoenaed to testify about how that evidence vanished. There were rumors he was going to name names, big names, judges, prosecutors, police commissioners who were on Calabrese's payroll, so they killed him, or he made a deal. Fake his death, disappear, stay quiet, and live. Come back when everyone involved is dead or retired." Margaret leaned closer. "Vincent Calabrese died in prison 5 years ago. The prosecutor from that case died of cancer 3 years ago. The police commissioner retired to Florida and died last year. Everyone who might have wanted Harold dead is gone." Rosa felt a chill. So he came back, with a new name, a clean record, and a federal appointment that puts him above local entanglements. Margaret sighed. "The question is, what do we do about it?" That was indeed the question. Rosa went home that night with her head spinning. If Judge Crawford was really Harold Fitzgerald, he'd committed massive fraud, false identity, lying to federal authorities, potentially escaping justice for corruption. But he might also have been a victim, forced into hiding by threats from organized crime. She observed him more carefully over the following weeks. Judge Crawford came to the cafeteria every Tuesday and Thursday, same as Judge Fitzgerald had. He ordered the same meals, sat in the same spot, even read his documents in the same way, holding them at arm's length, squinting slightly because he was too vain for reading glasses. But she noticed other things too. The way he tensed whenever someone approached unexpectedly. How he always sat facing the door. The careful way he avoided personal conversations. This was a man still looking over his shoulder, even after 20 years. One Thursday, Rosa decided to test him. As she served his coffee, she said casually, "You know, you remind me of someone, a judge we had here years ago, Harold Fitzgerald. Did you ever know him?" The coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. "No, I don't believe so. When did he serve?" "Oh, back in the 90s, early 2000s. Wonderful man. Tragic how he died. Car accident on Mountain Road. They say the curves are deadly in the rain." Judge Crawford had gone very pale. Mountain Road. Yes, dangerous curves. He stood abruptly, leaving his toast untouched. "I just remembered a conference call." "Thank you, Rosa." He knew her name. She hadn't worn a name tag in years, and she hadn't introduced herself to him as Judge Crawford. But Judge Fitzgerald would know her name. That afternoon, Rosa made her decision. She couldn't go to the authorities without more proof than resemblance and mannerisms, but she couldn't let it go either. She needed to find out the truth. Was Judge Crawford a corrupt judge hiding from justice, or an honest man who'd been forced to disappear? She started with the grand jury records from 2003. They were sealed. But Rosa had a friend who worked in records, someone who owed her a favor from years of free coffee and listening ears. It took some persuading, but eventually Rosa got a look at the file. What she found changed everything. Judge Fitzgerald hadn't been called to testify about his own corruption. He'd been the whistleblower. For 2 years, he'd been secretly documenting judicial corruption throughout the state. Bribes, case-fixing evidence, tampering. The network reached from local traffic court all the way to the state Supreme Court. And at the center was Vincent Calabrese, the mob boss who owned half the judges in the system. Fitzgerald had names, dates, recordings. He was prepared to bring down dozens of corrupt officials. Then, 3 days before his grand jury testimony, his car went off Mountain Road, but there was more. A handwritten note in the file, added by the lead investigator. Body identification questionable. Dental records provided by victim's dentist, Dr. Louis Marconi, known associate of Calabrese's sister who claimed body never found. Judge Fitzgerald's testimony would have convicted Calabrese and 23 others. Case closed due to witness death. Rosa sat back, the full picture finally clear. Judge Fitzgerald hadn't run from justice, he'd run for his life. Someone, probably federal authorities who needed his testimony, had helped him fake his death. But with Fitzgerald dead, the case had fallen apart. Calabrese and his network had remained free for years, until age and illness did what justice couldn't. Now, with his enemies dead or powerless, Harold Fitzgerald had returned as William Crawford. But why risk exposure by becoming a judge again? Keep watching to discover the truth about why a dead judge returned to life. Share this video to expose the corruption that forces honest people into hiding. Subscribe to Justice System USA for more stories of justice delayed and identities transformed. Rosa found her answer in Judge Crawford's recent rulings. In his short time on the federal bench, he'd made several significant decisions. He'd refused to dismiss a case against a police corruption ring. He'd allowed a RICO prosecution against organized crime figures to proceed. He'd protected witnesses who feared for their lives. Every ruling seemed designed to do what Harold Fitzgerald couldn't 20 years ago: bring justice to those who thought they were untouchable. He was finishing the work he'd started, using his new position and identity to fight the corruption he'd once tried to expose. But Rosa also discovered something else. 3 other judges had received death threats in recent weeks. All 3 were presiding over cases related to organized crime. History was repeating itself. But this time, Judge Crawford was in a position to protect his colleagues. Rosa made her decision. She would confront him, but privately. She waited until the courthouse was nearly empty, then knocked on his chamber's door. "Come in," the familiar voice called. Judge Crawford looked up from his desk, saw Rosa, and his face went through several emotions: surprise, fear, and finally, resignation. "Hello, Harold," Rosa said quietly, closing the door behind her. He was silent for a long moment. Then, "How long have you known?" "Since the first day you walked into my cafeteria. You still ordered the same breakfast." A slight smile crossed his face. "I never could break my habits. That's probably what got me killed the first time. Why did you come back?" He gestured to the files on his desk. "Because the job wasn't finished. The men who tried to kill me are gone, but their system remains. Corrupt judges, bought prosecutors, dirty cops. Someone needs to stop them, but the risk. I'm 71 years old, Rosa. I spent 20 years in hiding, watching criminals prosper, because I couldn't testify. 20 years of knowing that my death let guilty men go free. I couldn't die for real with that on my conscience. Rosa sat down across from him. Margaret O'Brien knows too. He nodded. I thought she might. She always was sharp. What really happened that night? Judge Fitzgerald, she couldn't think of him as Crawford, leaned back. The FBI had a credible threat on my life. Calabrese had put out a contract. Professional killers. The kind who make it look like an accident. The Bureau offered witness protection, but that would have meant abandoning the cases, letting the corruption continue. So you faked your death. The FBI arranged it. There was a John Doe in the morgue, a homeless man who'd died of natural causes, similar height and build. The car crash, the fire, all staged. Dr. Marconi, who was supposed to be Calabrese's man, was actually an undercover federal agent. He provided fake dental records to match the body. And then, new identity, new life in Nevada. I worked as a legal consultant, never in court, always behind the scenes. I watched from a distance as some of my colleagues continued fighting the good fight, and others gave in to corruption. I waited. For what? For Calabrese to die? For his lieutenants to age out or go to prison? For the statute of limitations to run out on any crimes they might have tried to pin on me? For a chance to come back and finish what I started? Rosa studied his face, seeing both the man she'd known and the stranger he'd become. And now I have a federal appointment and lifetime tenure. I'm untouchable in ways I wasn't before, and I have 20 years of observation, of understanding how these criminal networks operate. I can do more good as William Crawford than Harold Fitzgerald ever could. What about the fraud? The false identity? He smiled sadly. If they want to prosecute a federal judge for escaping a murder plot with government help, let them try. I think the story would be more embarrassing for them than for me. Rosa wrestled with her conscience. This man had committed fraud, had lived a lie for 20 years, but he'd done it to escape killers and was now using his position to fight corruption. Was that justice or vigilantism? What are you going to do? Judge Crawford asked. I don't know, Rosa admitted. This is bigger than right and wrong, isn't it? It's about survival and justice and compromise. It's about choosing which laws to break to uphold the greater law, he said. I've made my choice. Now you need to make yours. Rosa stood to leave, then turned back. The families of those who went free because you couldn't testify, do they deserve to know you're alive? Pain crossed his face. Every day I think about them. The victims who didn't get justice because I died. But if I reveal myself now, every case I touch will be tainted. Every criminal I put away will appeal. Based on my false identity, more victims will be denied justice. It was an impossible situation. Rosa left his chambers with no clear answer. Over the following days, she watched him work, watched him protect witnesses, support honest prosecutors, and systematically dismantle the remaining pieces of the corruption network he'd tried to expose 20 years ago. She made her choice. Rosa told no one. Not the FBI, not the media, not even Margaret O'Brien. She continued serving Judge Crawford his coffee and rye toast, continued calling him by his assumed name, continued protecting his secret. But she also started documenting everything. Every interaction, every observation, every piece of the story. She sealed it all in an envelope with instructions, to be opened only upon her death or his, whichever came first. Someone should know the truth eventually. History should record that Judge Harold Fitzgerald didn't die a victim but lived as a hidden hero, that sometimes justice requires wearing a mask. Years passed, Judge Crawford continued his quiet war against corruption. Rosa continued serving coffee and keeping secrets. They never spoke of it again, but sometimes their eyes would meet across the cafeteria, sharing the weight of truth. One morning, Rosa arrived to find Judge Crawford's usual table empty. She learned he'd suffered a heart attack the night before. He died en route to the hospital for real this time. He was 7'6" at his funeral, attended by colleagues who praised Judge William Crawford's integrity and dedication to justice. Rosa stood in the back. She was one of the few who knew they were burying Harold Fitzgerald for the second time. After the service, a young FBI agent approached her. Ms. Martinez, Judge Crawford left something for you. It was a letter, written in familiar handwriting. Dear Rosa, if you're reading this, then I'm finally, truly dead. Thank you for keeping my secret. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the greatest service to justice requires the greatest sacrifices. I've left instructions for my estate to create a scholarship fund for law students committed to fighting corruption. It will be administered anonymously. Of course, even in death, some secrets must be kept, but I wanted you to know the whole truth. Enclosed are my complete records from both lives, Harold Fitzgerald's investigation files that were thought destroyed, and William Crawford's continuation of that work. Someday, when all the players are gone, Perhaps this story can be told. You asked me once about the families of victims who didn't get justice because of my death. I've spent 20 years making amends, the only way I could, by preventing future victims. I hope it was enough. Thank you for the coffee, the rye toast, and the kindness you showed to both men. I had to be forever grateful. Harold Fitzgerald. William Crawford with the letter was a safety deposit box key. Inside, Rosa found thousands of pages documenting one of the largest judicial corruption investigations in American history, spanning 40 years and 2 identities. There were also letters sealed and addressed to the families of every victim, whose case had been compromised by his disappearance, to be delivered when the time is right. Rosa faced another choice: reveal everything now and potentially compromise ongoing cases, or continue keeping the secret, waiting for the right moment. She chose to wait. The documents went back into the safety deposit box, along with her own documentation, but she also chose to act. Using Judge Crawford's notes as a guide, she began identifying other corruption patterns in the courthouse. Who met with whom? Which lawyers always seemed to get favorable rulings? Which judges lived beyond their means? But Rosa Martinez, cafeteria worker, became an unlikely intelligence gatherer in the fight against corruption. She passed tips to honest prosecutors through anonymous letters. She warned witnesses who seemed to be in danger. She continued Judge Crawford's work in her own small way. The story of the judge who died twice remained secret for another decade. It finally came to light when Rosa, at 73 and dying of cancer, released all the documents to a journalist she trusted. The revelations shook the legal community. Some called Harold Fitzgerald, William Crawford, a hero who sacrificed everything for justice. Others branded him a fraud who undermined the very system he claimed to protect. The debate continues to this day. Law schools study the Fitzgerald dilemma: when is it acceptable to break the law to serve justice? Ethicists argue about identity, truth, and the greater good. But in the courthouse where it all happened, they remember simpler truths. They remember a judge who tried to expose corruption and paid with his life, or at least his identity. They remember another judge who finished that work under an assumed name. And they remember a cafeteria worker who kept their secret because she understood that sometimes justice wears disguises. The courthouse cafeteria has a new worker now, but Rosa's photo hangs on the wall. Below it, a small plaque reads, Rosa Martinez, 1950 to 2021. She served coffee, kept secrets, and pursued justice in her own quiet way. Judge Harold Fitzgerald's name was quietly added to the memorial wall, with his real date of death. Next to it hangs another plaque for Judge William Crawford. Some find it strange to have 2 plaques for one man. Those who know the truth understand. It's appropriate he lived 2 lives in service of one ideal. The corruption he fought has largely been rooted out, though everyone knows it's a constant battle. New safeguards are in place, inspired by his story. Judges receive better protection when threatened. Whistleblowers have more resources, and everyone watches a little more carefully for signs of corruption. But perhaps the most important legacy is the reminder that justice sometimes requires extraordinary sacrifices, that identity is less important than integrity, that a judge may need to die to preserve justice, and that a cafeteria worker's sharp memory and moral courage can be as important as any legal ruling. In the end, Harold Fitzgerald got what he'd always wanted: justice. It took 40 years, 2 identities, and the help of an observant woman serving coffee, but justice was served, even if it came disguised as rye toast and black coffee. No butter. Thank you for watching this extraordinary story of identity, justice, in the price of fighting corruption. The tale of Judge Fitzgerald Crawford reminds us that sometimes heroes must hide in plain sight, and that the pursuit of justice can require the ultimate sacrifice, not just of life, but of identity itself. What would you have done in Rosa's position? Would you have exposed Judge Crawford immediately, or kept his secret to allow him to continue fighting corruption? There are no easy answers when law and justice conflict. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Justice System USA. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with others who need to understand that justice sometimes wears a disguise, and that the most observant people in our courthouses might not be wearing robes. Where are you watching from today? Whether you're in a big city courthouse or a small town cafe, remember, the fight against corruption requires everyone's participation. Sometimes judges lead that fight. Sometimes they need to disappear to continue it. And sometimes, a cafeteria worker with a good memory becomes the guardian of truth. Until next time, this is Justice System USA, where we believe that justice is bigger than any one identity, that truth eventually surfaces even after 20 years, and that every person in the courthouse, from judges to janitors, has a role in preserving the integrity of our legal system. Stay vigilant. Question coincidences. And remember, in the halls of justice, the most important verdicts aren't always rendered in courtrooms. Sometimes they're decided over black coffee and rye toast, no butter, by people brave enough to see the truth and wise enough to know when to reveal it. Asterisk. Because in the end, justice isn't about who you are, it's about what you do. And sometimes, what you do requires becoming someone else entirely.